question, the member for Kiiwetinoong.
Mr. Speaker, this question is to the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry. This week, the Minister spoke about the government's commitment to making the North open for business and said that the Ministry was properly engaging all stakeholders on the Far North Act. Proper engagement on such an important act should not be rushed, and it involves more than 2 hearings in Northern Ontario. By rushing hearings and making communities travel to give evidence, many community voices will be missed. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister make a commitment today to proactively and fully engage with First Nations on what happens in the far north? Miigwech.
Thank you. Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker, and I want to thank the member for that question. And that is something that we are absolutely committed to do, and that is engagement with our Indigenous peoples and First Nations. And my colleague, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, is looking after that side of it. He will lead those engagement sessions with our Indigenous peoples. I want to point out very clearly, Speaker, that when the Far North Act was brought in by the previous government, there was no engagement with Indigenous peoples. They did not want it. We heard from all across the Far North, with Indigenous peoples and with every other citizen across the Far North, businesses and otherwise. They did not want the Far North Act. We are now committed to improving the situation, bringing jobs and development back to the Far North, giving them an opportunity to enjoy the prosperity that other people in Ontario depend on. So I'm going to be working with my colleague, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs and Northern Development and Mines, and working to fully engage First Nations to ensure that they have the opportunities that they deserve as well.
Hear, hear. Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, First Nations in the far north want to benefit from the resources in their treaty lands. But many First Nations are concerned the minister is undermining the duty to consult when he refers to cutting red tape. Speaker, First Nations are not red tape.
Hear, hear.
Supporting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples gives the government the path to resource development they need. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I'm here to tell the government Far North is not open for business without the involvement in development with our territories. Will the minister commit to respecting our treaty rights through meaningful consultation and involvement with communities affected by the Far North Act?
Thank you. Members, please take their seats. I recognize the Minister to reply.
To the Minister of Indigenous Affairs.
Minister of Indigenous Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate the honourable member's question. In fact, I had an opportunity to discuss this matter with Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler yesterday. Look, Mr. Speaker, we're focused on an act here that was never consulted in the first place for those communities. I haven't met a First Nations leader in my extensive time living and working up there who liked anything about this act, Mr. Speaker. Designations of park status on some of their traditional lands and including some of their reservation lands, Mr. Speaker. This is completely unacceptable. It is put a stop to good business opportunities in Northern Ontario. Of course, First Nations communities, Mr. Speaker, ought to have, as my learned colleague said, every opportunity to develop their resources, participate in the economic activity, and see an improvement in the overall conditions, economic conditions and prospects in their communities moving forward. And that's exactly what we intend to deliver.
Thank you.